Keith Morrison described that once police were called and arrived at 1122 King Road that morning, they found Xana Kernodle in a massive pool of blood. They found Ethan Chapin, according to NBC, dead in Xana's bed. And then there's what Dateline revealed about the crime scene itself. They say Xana may have heard something upstairs on the third floor and maybe even gone to check on Kaylee and Maddie up there. According to NBC sources, Xana was likely chased back downstairs to the second floor, possibly the moment that Bryan Kohberger, if he's the killer, dropped or left behind that knife sheath. The fight that followed in Xana's room, according to Dateline, was brutal. So brutal that investigators found a blood-stained chair, suggesting that the killer either sat down or brushed against it during the attack. And then, as for Ethan, Dateline again with some astounding information. They report that one of Ethan's wounds pierced an artery and that his legs were, quote, carved. Their words, carved. And that his legs were, quote, carved. Their words, carved.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Listen to Pavarotti. Can I be your superhero?
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I'm your host, Pavarotti, and I'm here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. And you know, ever since they released this flurry of new documents, I have been unable really to get much past the autopsy report. And the reason for that is we have been waiting for years for the autopsy report, the actual autopsy report. And they've wanted to keep that hidden for years. I mean, for years. And we've heard things along the way, like you heard Banfield say in the opening when she was summarizing the Dateline leak. In fact, you heard her say several things as she was summarizing that Dateline leak. And that's why I'm a little bit, always just kind of taken back a little bit by the ramifications of that Dateline leak. But one of the things that she mentioned, that they did mention in that Dateline episode, was the fact that Ethan's legs were, quote, carved. And that's always sat with me. And then I think about all the secrecy around this case for all these years, how they were very, very strict on releasing the actual crime scene photos of the victims, even though in other cases they always do it. In this one, they went through extra steps to make sure nobody ever looked at those. And then I think about the fact that all the bodies of the victims were cremated very quickly. And it all just kind of adds up to one big, what is going on here? Well, let me tell you, I implored the best AI I could possibly find, had it create images of autopsy reports. I'm sure a lot of other people out there have done that as well. And no matter, I tried to get it to do it accurately. I even typed out exactly what I wanted it to look like, and it tried to do it. I tried to do it 50 times, and the AI is just not there yet. It won't do it. So, but you know what? The first video I put out on the autopsy, that was good. Using AI, it helped me learn a lot. Now, I am much more, because I've been doing video after video with the members, going through and teaching myself basically how to read these autopsy reports. And what I found is the use of that AI does point you in good directions. So I've found programs that allow me to go through and do anatomical 3D research on every little muscle and bone in the body very easily. Gives me the definitions of the terminology so that I'm able to really grasp things a little bit better and really be able to demonstrate this stuff down to the fine details on everything. So that's what I'm doing, and I'm putting some cheat sheets in here just to make sure that I've got everything correct and I can analyze everything properly, because I know now that the reason that they don't want to show pictures of these victims and they did not want to release these autopsy reports for so long, well, now I know why. And what I'm going to show you in this video is possibly going to answer all the questions that we have around this case. And it is going to be shocking, I assure you. And even though it could be one of those videos where Pav goes, "Told you so," I'm not going to do that, because I don't want to say "told you so." I don't even want to really have to do this, but I'm pretty sure that nobody else is going to put this thing together like I'm about to put it together for you. And it is the most shocking thing that I can possibly imagine. And I was really stunned when I realized that the AI images that it was creating for me showed me something that I wasn't prepared for. But then upon further study, it showed me something that I really wasn't prepared for. And then I was able to go through and locate things that absolutely almost my jaw hit the floor, y'all. And once again, I'm not here to say I'm right and other people's theories are wrong. I'm just here to give you my interpretation of these facts, and I'll let you decide for yourself. But this is going to be a pretty shocking video. And also, like in the video I did yesterday, if y'all seen that, why I hear these things around the whole Xana in the kitchen, because I know they originally started with Xana upstairs because they thought it was Xana's blood on the door upstairs. But the reason it really frustrates me is not just because I've looked at all the evidence in the crime scene and I know that it's not correct and it doesn't make any sense, but it's because I know it is the narrative that Dateline tried to push. And just to show you that I'm not whistling Dixie.
According to NBC sources, Xana was likely chased back downstairs to the second floor, possibly the moment that Bryan Kohberger, if he's the killer, dropped or left behind that knife sheath. Just jump in here for a moment, because unless we learn something earth-shattering about the forensics at trial, it is hard to imagine what forensic information could lead any investigator to have a theory that Xana left her room with Ethan, went all the way down her hall, turned right and up the stairs to the third floor, only to come running back down without screaming so loud that at least Dylan would hear, because she'd run right past Dylan's door and then down the hall back to her room. There's nothing so far in anything that we've seen in any of the court documents or affidavits or police documents to suggest this forensically could have happened. But Dateline says, the source says, this is what is possible, that Xana may have run back down to her room and then met this extraordinary, violent death.
Doesn't that sound familiar? I mean, that was Banfield the day after the Dateline episode premiered, with all of that info that pretty much sealed Bryan Kohberger's fate. And that was the conversations that were happening between that episode and the plea deal. So yeah, I get a little bit, my hackles get up a little bit when I hear people repeat that over and over that are supposedly out trying to expose things in the case. Things that they seem to be exposing are the same stuff that I heard on that Dateline episode. And I know they're not facts. But that's not why we're here in this one, folks. It was the other thing that was said in that Dateline episode in correlation to what we now know from the autopsy reports. Hold on to your jaw, because it will be on the floor, I assure you.
And that his legs were, quote, carved. Their words, carved.
Now, this is where things get crazy. And this is what I was talking about yesterday when the AI created the image. My eyeballs popped out of my head, and it really made me focus in on this a little bit harder, because I knew something wasn't right just by the image AI was making. But remember, the image that AI made for me was a big X, and I thought, this is not natural. This is purposeful. This is some type of mark. But now that I look closer, get rid of the AI and just study it with my own eyes and my own brain, I've realized some things. So if you take somebody that's 6'3", your area between the hip and the thighs, roughly about 18 inches. So roughly 18 inches from here to here. So when we look at what it actually says, on the posterior left thigh is a gaping wound complex consisting of at least 3 intersecting stab wounds. My AI came up with 2 very large ones. That's not how this actually works. These are 3 intersecting stab wounds, but they're only measuring, one is 1 1/4 inches. The other 2 are 2.5 and 2 1/4 inches in length from lateral to medial, with a combined width of up to 2 inches. And if the person is lying face down, this area is the big fleshy area on the back of the leg right below the buttocks. So it's going to be this area right here. And it's talking about 3 stab wounds, basically. 2 of them very similar in size, 2.5 and 2 1/4 inches. The third one is about an inch less than those. But they're all in a grouping in this area that doesn't exceed a 2-inch complex. So all this is very interesting to me, and they intersect as well. So the way I've got them right here, I've got 3, but that's not how they're actually positioned. They intersect each other. It's a complex of them intersecting each other, and it's only 2 inches in width. And we know exactly how big these are. So what I did was I really dove into this, because when we think about it's 2.5 inches and 2 1/4 inches on 2 of these, and it's all 3 of them are at a exact same depth of 4 inches. So when you think about it, like using the K-bar as an example, it's a 7-inch blade. I mean, that's a pretty strong stab to stab into a thigh muscle 4 inches, but not do it once, do it 3 times. But 2 of the times you do it, this blade is only just barely over an inch thick. So the first time you do it, you're going in 4 inches, and then you're having to forcefully extend that wound out to 2.5 inches. That's more than double the size of the blade. That requires some strength and effort. But the fact that they did it twice and tried to get them to be obviously close to the same length, that is not trying to incapacitate somebody. That's purposeful. They created these 2 deep stab and then had to pull the knife. I hate saying this, but pull the knife through the meat long enough to create a long slash 2.5 inches long. That is purposeful. But the fact that the third mark is only 1 1/4 inches, just about the size of the blade, but it's the same depth, tells me that that was purposeful as well. These are 3 purposeful marks. And it's a complex of these marks, and they all intersect, but the intersecting complex can't exceed 2 inches. All the clues are there for us. So what I did was take the alphabet, and I went through the alphabet using 2 long slashes, 2.5, basically these are the same, 2.5, 2 1/4, let's just call them both 2.5. And then the third one of 1 1/4. And I said, okay, let me take the alphabet and what letters can I make? Because none of these work for numbers. What letters can I make with these 3 slashes that fit all the criteria? And I was able to quickly eliminate most of the alphabet except for A, F, H, N, S, Y, and Z. So I said, okay, well, which one of these or which group of these actually work? With these 2 equally linked slashes, one that's 1 1/4 versus 2 2 1/4, an inch smaller, but they have to be in a grouping that can't exceed 2 inches according to the pathologist, and they have to intersect. So I go through one by one and I take Z. And this is where I had to really use my old math skills and geometry and everything else. Because in Z, if I have 2 that are the same length that are both over 2 inches, then that leaves the third short one to either be the top, the bottom, or the middle. And it doesn't work for any of it because the bottom or the top has to be straight. And anytime a long one's going to be straight, it's going to be more than that 2-inch barrier that the pathologist said that this grouping was in. So this being at least 2 1/4 inches or 2 1/2 already exceeds it. You can't have a straight line here or a straight line here and have it work. So it can't be a Z. So I go to the Y. Now again, the same principle works. If the Y is straight, meaning not at this angle, if it's straight up and down on one of the 2 1/2 or 2 1/4, then it exceeds the 2-inch limit. So I would have to put the short one here and then extend the long ones out, which makes this one way too big. I mean, it's literally about 4 inches this way and it just doesn't work. So I go to S. S, I go into the same problems that I had with Z. It doesn't work. So I go to N. And N, it doesn't really matter if I put the small slash here, here, or here. Any one of these in a straight line is going to be exceeding the 2-inch grouping limit. So it's not an N. So I go to F. And F, if you A squared plus B squared equals C squared, and either one of these is 2 1/4 or 2 1/2 inches, it automatically eliminates F. If I try to put the small slash anywhere, because these are going to be long, it's all going to exceed 2 inches. No, can't be F. So I said, well, H has got to be it because H really makes sense. You have 2 long slashes, the short slash in the middle. But when you look at H, although it would work this way for being less than 2 inches, this way is always going to be more than 2 inches because these are 2 1/2 and 2 1/4. So H doesn't work either. I said, well, maybe none of these work. But then I got to A. And what's crazy about the geometry of A is obviously the small slash is going to be across the middle. And when you do that, then you take the limitations of H that are at least 2 1/4 inches exceeding the 2-inch barrier this way. And by tilting these 2 H's in, you actually shorten the total length of those 2 lines, which makes 2 inches this way absolutely perfect with 2 inches this way. So I've got 3 intersecting lines, 2 1/4, 2 1/2, 1 1/4. They all intersect. They're in a grouping that's smaller than a perimeter of 2 inches. And it's a complex. It's a complex, all right. It's a complex that matches everything in these slashes, and it was done on purpose. Ethan had the mark of who committed this atrocity right there on his thigh. But what it actually looks like, because on the posterior left thigh is a gaping wound complex, and it's lateral to medial, which means it's going from lateral to medial, which means it's in this position right here. So this is what was carved on Ethan's leg, an A, and it does not stop there. Well, it wasn't too hard to find now that I know what to look for. It's always going to be a 3 wound section where it doesn't just say 1 wound, it'll say 3. And it's always going to be a wound complex consisting of 3 intersecting incised wounds, and then altogether measuring approximately 4 by 1 inches in greatest dimension. And then they don't want to go into any other kind of detail. It doesn't say. I mean, they talk about some abrasions near it and how deep it is, but it's right there. Maddie Mogan, temporal fossa on the upper right cheek. She's got the 1, 2, 3 slash mark in the complex, incised wounds, 2 4-inch and a 1-inch. It's an A right on her cheek. And the only person that doesn't have this is Kaylee Gonzalez. But then I get to this and I went, oh my God, you have got to be kidding me. And this is on Xana. This is 3 wounds. Watch this. On the central forehead. So you picture the forehead, and on the central forehead, so right in the middle of Xana's forehead. Now, this is not natural here by any means, or not organic in an assault. Right in the middle of the forehead for everybody to see is a wound complex consisting of at least 3 intersecting linear and curvilinear incised wounds. Now, because they're right in the middle of the forehead, there's 3 of them, they're intersecting. At least 1, if not 2 of them, I imagine 2 of them are going to be linear, which means straight, and then at least 1 is going to be curvilinear, cut at an angle, and these are obviously going to be intentional wounds. I don't think it's too hard to figure out what it is that they're doing right here after we figured out what they did on Ethan. So they intersect, consisting of 3 from 1 to 1.5 inches right in the middle of the forehead. There is associated subcutaneous and subgaleal hemorrhage. The outer table of the skull shows 2 linear 2.5-inch defects. This is 3, a complex, 3 slashes intersecting right in the middle of the forehead. 2 slashes linear, 1 curve linear. They marked the middle of Xana's forehead with an A. Now, obviously, we would need to actually see these wounds to verify 1000% that that's what happened. But I think it's quite obvious. And then when we add up all the other things around this case that we've wondered about for so long, why the secrecy around what happened? Did law enforcement know from the get-go what happened? Why was the investigation into all of the people around them so weak? Why did they ask them questions that everybody listens to the questions and thinks, well, they didn't go far enough. Why didn't they dig in? I believe this gives us the answers that we're looking for. And it also gives us the answers that we're looking for, in my opinion, of what happened after the crime. Because if I'm correct, you can bet that there was people in that house long before the 911 call was made that was law enforcement that knew what happened. And they had to put together something pretty quick. They had to eliminate things like footprints in the house of theirs or anybody else that went in there in between then and the 911 call, who I firmly believe one of them was driving that black Ford Explorer, because somebody pulled into that driveway with that black Ford Explorer at 429. Dylan made a phone call to somebody at 427 that was likely driving that black Ford Explorer. But it brings up so many questions, because now, if that is the case, and I am correct, then all these people that are coming out now with all this information saying they've seen autopsy photos would have seen these things. The defense would have seen these things. Prosecution, everybody would have seen these things. Everybody would be in on this secret except us. So what's really going on? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Please like and subscribe to this channel. Post your comments, thoughts, criticisms. When I'm done with these autopsies, you'll know exactly what happened on every single wound, because I am breaking this stuff down, because this is probably the most important evidence that's come out in this case, in my humble opinion. Pav's out.